Welcome to the Bagri Foundation's Open Up series. I'm Alessandra Cianetti, Project Manager for the Foundation. Today, we have the pleasure to talk to Boedi Widjaja for a conversation that we hope will delve into his fascinating work and what's important to him today. We launched the Open Up series back in June because we are living through an incredible moment in our history. There is so much change going on daily, culturally, environmentally, socially, that it felt fitting to go beyond talking about artists' work, but to explore further what drives them and their practice and how things are changing for them. And Boedi's work touches upon some of these major shifts in the world, from cultural and disciplinary border crossings to notions of migration and search for home. Just a brief biography for those who don't know his work yet. So, Boedi Widjaja was born in Indonesia and migrated to Singapore at the age of 9 due to acting tensions, separated from his parents. His practice draws on his own transmigrant lived experiences, researching diaspora and homelands, Indo-Asia-Pacific geopolitics, and cross-cultural hybridities. Trained as an architect and with a background in graphic design, the techniques, material, and tools of drawing have become a defining element of Widjaja's artistic practice. This is expressed through a broad range of media, from photography, new media, live art, architectural installations, with an emphasis on process and bodily engagement. Widjaja's work has been presented internationally. He was the recipient of the Singapore Art Museum co-commission for a large-scale architectural and sound installation for the 9th Asia-Pacific Triennial and the 6th Singapore Biennial. Before we start, for those of you who are watching, please feel free to write any thoughts or comments or questions in our comment section, and we will endeavor to answer these as best as we can. So, thank you, Boedi, for joining us today.
Thank you, Ali.
So I'd like to start where your biography leaves us at, actually the 6th Singapore Biennial, titled Every Step in the Right Direction. It ended, if I'm not wrong, a few weeks before Singapore entered lockdown. So I wonder how your space, the space where you work and the way you work has changed, since the biennials closed.
Well, that has changed quite significantly for me because I work from an apartment studio. And during the 2-month-long lockdown, we were not, the government discouraged us from leaving our homes for reasonable reasons. And that really basically condensed the amount of space that we have between family members. And it was a very new situation for me. I wasn't able to really work to produce art during those 2 months because it was a very, very different set of conditions that I was used to. And I realized a lot about these conditions in those 2 months, in fact, yes.
When were you able to go back to your studio?
It was, I think, sometime at the end of May that we were able to do so. And but even then, I still had a fair bit of trouble trying to get back into my, I guess, daily rhythm. Because of the disruption. And I think even now I'm still sort of trying to re-enter into that rhythm and to slowly get back into a certain state of mind that is required to produce art, yes.
It takes time to go back to a kind of normality, I suppose.
I think so. I'm sorry. Yeah. I never realized how much support that I had been receiving from I guess, the normalcy of things, and to live through the days of uncertainty and of reading the bad news coming in constantly, and to, I guess, suddenly having to take on quite a number of logistical matters to take care of, how our daily lives are supposed to work. And because schools closed, and my wife and I, we had to, I guess, participate more in the daily undertakings of our daughter's education, and so forth. All those were new elements that we had to grapple with all of a sudden. It was a rather confusing time for all of us in Singapore.
Yes, I think all over the world. And
Yes.
going back to the commission, I would love to share an image of your commission for the biennial, with our viewer. Here it is. I wonder whether you can talk about this wonderful sound and architectural installation that I would like to to know a bit more about what inspired this installation, pre-COVID-19 times, how its presentation felt to you, because it was presented in two different contexts.
Yes. So the project was a co-commission by two institutions. The first being the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, and the second being the Singapore Art Museum. And Black Heart, the sound and architectural installation, took on different forms at the two sites, one in Brisbane and one in Singapore. However, the two structures shared a common link, if you like, which is to look at the vernacular architecture that is found across the equator within the tropical and subtropical region of the Earth. And in Brisbane, the vernacular architecture is one about a house that is built on stilts called the Queenslander. And in Singapore, or at least in Southeast Asia, it takes on the form of the Malay house that is also built on stilts. Hence, I grew interested in the physical separation between the floor of this traditional house and the land. And I used that gap between the two grounds as a departure point for the project. The installation addressed this gap in two ways. For the installation in Australia, it made use of a mezzanine level of the existing gallery and built a concrete platform to extend the mezzanine level across the lower gallery. Whereas the one that was presented at the National Gallery Singapore looked at the gap from an underground perspective, using the subterranean site at the National Gallery of Singapore to build a structure that rested on the staircase which connected the ground to the new basement level of the museum. Both structures had a similar element of using concrete that had been mixed with a large amount of salt to encourage this natural phenomenon called efflorescence, which is a kind of salt blooming that happens a lot in the tropical and subtropical climate. And over the entire exhibition period of both the Asia-Pacific Triennale in Brisbane and the Singapore Biennale in Singapore, the dark pigmented concrete slowly transformed over time, showing more and more of the salt crystals over time. And in both structures, I also had installed a sound installation titled Datum. And this sound installation consisted of sounds that were recorded from a 100-year-old gamelan, which is a traditional Javanese musical instrument that was originally sourced from the palace of Surakarta, which is near my childhood house in my hometown in Indonesia. I came across an online library of this recorded gamelan, and I perceived them as kind of an image of the original material gamelan instrument, almost like a frottage of the original instrument. And I went on to rearrange these gamelan sounds using ideas that were inspired from music serialism, and also inversed the gamelan sounds into these pulses that the visitors experienced when they visited the installations on site. So this project is an extension of the first Black Heart installation that was presented in Singapore at the Institute of Contemporary Arts. And it is a series that look at the architectural aspects of the house, to look at issues of dwelling and belonging, which is a recurrent motif in my practice.
It must have been an incredible experience to be there. And it's true that you have been working with, a lot of natural materials and elements that work around home, that talk about home. What does it mean to find shelter all over your career? So it's amazing to see at which point I've been following your work for a while now, at which point you have, upscaled your research. But I will just stop sharing this image because I would love to go back to this here, because you mentioned that you have not been very prolific. However, I know that you have also published a book this year. I would like to share the image. So this year you have published the book Shadowless, that's been commissioned by Plural Art Mag. So drawing is a central part of your practice as an artist. In the catalog of your 2019 solo exhibition in New York, for the exhibition called Declaration of, you mentioned that for your drawing is more of an action, an act, than a medium. And at the same time, you often have been, using, you're referring to when referring to drawing, you have been using the word mark making. During your career, you have been making marks, with graphite, chalks, rocks, and various materials. And also in the same catalog, you refer to mark making as always a new beginning, as a way of, mark making is about beginnings. So I wonder if this publication is also a new beginning for you in this troubled 2020.
There are so many ways to think about mark making or drawing. Beginnings is definitely one of the ways in which I look at the act of drawing and mark making. One of the memorable experience I've ever had was to visit the prehistoric caves in southwest France. And it was then that I experienced the beginnings of art by looking at the marks and the drawings on the cave walls. And drawings and mark makings were activities that I had I had participated in my childhood home in Indonesia. It was something that always brought back very fond memories of my own beginnings as a child. However, there is another dimension to the act of drawing and mark making, which is the act of looking, the act of grounding to a moment and to a place. And for this particular work, Shadowless, it was my way of looking at time that I spent during the lockdown period, where every day felt almost the same with the other. Hence, there was a sense of repeated meditation, and it was a rather painful meditation because I think the whole world was meditating on the loss of our freedom, and for many people it would be meditating and mourning the loss of loved ones. Hence the character of the one-armed swordsman who lost his arm in the film became much more meaningful for me in this project. And I was also, I guess, thinking about this particular place in Singapore that I visited a lot with my father during the school holidays when he would come by to visit us. A place called Bras Basah Complex that was previously also known as the City of Books because it used to house many, many bookshops that people like my dad and myself would visit. And how in today the place has changed so dramatically. There is hardly any bookshops left in that place. Hence, the ruin of that city of books was something that I was thinking about when I made this work. Therefore, the idea of repetition, the idea of sameness, but with nuanced differences, came across very strongly in this work. And of course, there is that pairing with the heartbreak Indonesian song titled Without Your Shadow, which is really a lament of the passing of a loved one and of the gap or of the void that is left behind. That I think forms a very important part of the impulses behind this work.
It sounds like this work helped also you, going through this period and trying to understand and grasp what was happening in the world, in your life. So it seems kind of a very healing process. Is that correct?
Yes, I guess so. Well, I think there is always a cathartic dimension to the act of drawing. And for this work, especially, I think it's a way of perhaps venting out or expressing that sense of loss, that sense of daily uncertainty and that we all experienced during this period.
Thanks so much, Boedi. So I'd like to share just a final image. That is one of the images that you have shared with us when we asked you, to send some examples of your work. Oh, here it is. Okay, and this image refers to your work as a live and performance artist. And in this image, we are here in London in 2015. You were performing part 7, new ground, a piece of live art that was part of the series Path, and that you were performing as part of the Barbican's program Interfaces. And in this case, the performance was curated by Something Human. So series of works and processes of embodiment has been a very big part of your work as a performer. And now that we, the world has been changing with all the current rules on social distancing, I wonder, how do you see your work as a live artist going from here? How it has been affected by those rules, but also what do you see in the future of live art?
Wow, I wish I had the answer for you because
We love
this is such a challenging time for artists who work with site specificities like myself. Especially so with live art, where the bodily engagement with a site is absolutely necessary. I really don't know how the future will be for live art. My sense is that we will have to think about what embodiment means in a virtual environment, what it means to perform for video, and what does it mean to engage with the idea of place, the idea of spatial, material, and tactile space in this new format. These are going to be very difficult and challenging questions. However, I hope that as the pandemic situation gets better, that we will have some kind of recovery, some kind of return to actual site, physical and material and spatial, where artists like myself can engage through our physical presence with places. And yeah, I think that's really the best answer that I can come up so far.
No, absolutely. We are not asking you to give us a solution. No worries. It's just obviously everybody is engaging with these questions and trying to find way to keep expressing their own, practice through performance. It's a practice that requires the presence as well, of a public, this interaction and the space. But I think we're all thinking through this in this period. But thanks so much.
I have maybe I just came across an idea in my mind, and perhaps it is worth sharing. There could be perhaps an existing technology where we can link ourselves, virtually using sensors. I mean, we already have piezo sensors that could transmit kind of a tactility or tactile sensations, for example. Hence, I can possibly envision screens or the computers being linked up into such sensors, and visitors, where the audience could possibly, physically have contact with such sensors, and where the movement or the performance of the artist could then be translated into actual sensations that the audience could actually feel with their skin. And also using sound, such as binaural sound technology, that has already been used for theater performances. I think that could potentially create a highly spatial experience for the audience. Hence, there are technologies out there that I think can translate a piece of art into an experience that is both spatial and tactile for the audience.
Yeah, that's a very important thing, because you can bring the other senses, not only the sight, but also smell, touch, into it back to the audience. So we are waiting for your performance with those technologies, hopefully soon,
Well, hopefully, yeah.
So viewers that have been following the Open Up series know that we ask some probing questions during the series. I'm aware of time, so I will ask you 2 quick questions, if you don't mind. And one will be, because you were talking about the city of book. So what book do you recommend everyone must read before they die?
It's a very difficult question, because I love so many different books. But if I have to pick one, it will have to be The Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Mm-hmm. It is a book that touched me in a very deep way. Each time I read the imaginative descriptions of the city of Venice. Mm-hmm. And I was struck at how the character, the central character in the book could conceive so many different ways of speaking about his home in Venice. Mm-hmm. And I think in a large way, that is how I have been thinking about the idea of house, home, and homeland in my practice, mm-hmm. to somehow think about them in many different dimensions, in many different ways, and many different materials, spatial dimensions, physical dimensions, conceptual dimensions, and so forth. And the point of origin always keeps on giving, very much like how the home of the central character of the book kept on giving to him. Yeah. I would definitely recommend that book to anybody.
Thanks so much. And now I will reread it after your description, because I read it so long ago that I really feel I have to reread it. Thank you. And our last question is, what would you save if your house was on fire?
Assuming that there is nobody in the house to save, which would be the priority, I would then look to rescue 2 items. The first would be the handwritten letters that my ex-girlfriend, who is now my wife, had written to me in days of our youth. And the second item would be the hand drawings that my daughter had done when she was still a toddler, because they very precious drawings to me.
So you will bring, you will take love, the memories of love and the act of loves of your families. There's a very, very sweet things to think about for our, conclusions. And thanks so much, Boedi. It was a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope that everyone enjoyed knowing a bit more about Boedi's amazing work. And we'll keep a lookout for our coming interviews as part of the Open Up series. Thank you again, Boedi, and to everyone as well.
Thank you, Ali. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you.